Hello, everybody. This is Naomi and Naomi Killian from ASU. And today I'll be talking about competency to refuse an insanity defense and refuse other mental state defenses. So to start, what is the competency to refuse an insanity defense? So competency to refuse an insanity defense, it refers to a defendant's ability to understand the nature and consequences of rejecting such a defense despite any mental illness or impairment. So this is different from incompetent during the time of the crime. So these are two different things. So that's something really important. So this is making sure somebody understands the legal proceedings that happen during a court trial. So second bulletin, this happens when the defense attorney, the prosecutor, or the court believes that a defendant may be insane at the time of the offense, but defendant does not want to assert such a defense. So this is just another example of how the being competent during the actual trial is important. So just making sure, so this is something that the defense attorney, the prosecutor, and the court can kind of all agree on, or even the attorney may, want to talk to the court and say, hey, I believe that my client is not able, due to their mental illness, whatever, we may actually need some type of psychological evaluation. Okay, so some of the key legal concepts, just to kind of go through a couple of definitions here. So competency is the ability to understand and participate in legal proceedings. So kind of in my last slide, I explained that a little bit about does the defendant actually understand what is happening in court, and are they able to proceed with the best type of defense? Second, the insanity defense, it's a plea asserting that mental illness prevented the defendant from understanding their actions or distinguishing right from wrong. Again, this is actually during the court proceedings, not during the crime. So, refusal of the defense. This is the decision for an insanity plea, and it potentially leads to more a severe outcome. So, the defense does can, if they like, refuse the insanity defense. This is some of the examples we saw in this week's reading. Okay, so ethical issues with this concept. This raises a legal and ethical question about autonomy, fairness, and balance between the individual rights and the justice system. Balancing the individual autonomy with social interests in justice, ensuring fairness while respecting the defendant's decision. Because if a defendant is saying they want to refuse the insanity defense, are they really getting the best care defensively to ensure the best outcome for the trial that we'll be proceeding? Also, addressing any stigmas and misconceptions about mental illness in the legal system. So, some of the case studies I wanted to involve in this presentation, like Ted Kaczynski, he was and I might be saying that wrong, I believe it's pronounced Kaczynski. He was a Unabomber. He actually refused an insanity defense to maintain control over his narrative. This was actually similar in the Dylan Roof case, where he refused the insanity defense because he wanted to, it was noted that he also wanted to, control the narrative. He, didn't, of course, media, the prosecution, they can kind of bring up whatever they see fit, within legal boundaries. So sometimes when they want to represent themselves, it may be to control what they want to control comes out during any legal trial. Tom Ferguson, we also talked about him in our classwork last week. He represented himself despite questions about his mental state, which was proven. John Higley Jr., he successfully used the insanity defense, but it raised debates about competency standards. So some of our in-text examples was what Wellham versus United States. The judge wrote to the Federal Court of Appeals to require trial judges to impose an insanity defense when the defense would likely succeed. So basically, this just means um, forcing the person to use the actual insanity defense, even if the defendant does refuse. So on the flip side, we have Frederick versus United States. This required the defendant's decision regarding the defendant's assertion to be followed when the defendant is competent to make it. So, in simpler terms, if the defendant refuses the insanity defense, it is their choice and they are making the actual decision, and the court has to accept that they are using that defense. So this was another concept that during my research I was able to see. So we have Frederick's reason for the refusal idea. So these are kind of some reasons as to why somebody would refuse a insanity defense. So a defendant may fear a lengthier confinement in a mental institution. So we did kind of discuss this in one of the lectures this week. There's a big misconception between um jail time and mental health, in a sense, confinement. So when someone goes to a mental health facility, sometimes their sentence is a little bit longer than it would be because they have to make sure that the person is, okay when they go to these mental hospitals. And if they go to just a regular, prison, there's kind of a misconception that if you are found guilty by not guilty by reason of insanity, um, then that means, oh, you're let off. But really, it's you almost have a little bit more, you're more confined. You don't get as much freedom when you go to a mental health facility. So that's a really big misconception when it comes to actually being, found guilty or incompetent to stand trial. Also, secondly, objection to the type of quality treatment in a mental institution. So again, that's just kind of talking about what goes on in that mental institution. Also, the defendant chooses a guilty plea to avoid the stigma of mental illness implied with the insanity verdict because they may not want to be associated with any type of mental illness. They may not feel like they have a mental illness and don't want to be stigmatized as somebody that is crazy or somebody that, can't, is sick in the mind, even though they, committed some type of horrific crime. Also, the desire to avoid collateral consequences of insanity acquittal through life and also undermining the defendant's political or religious views of the crime. So there may be some political and religious reasons why they don't want to go in. Through my research about court cases just in the past, every, criminal has their limits. And, religion and politics may be a part of that, and there are lines that they're just not willing to cross. So I'm just going to play a short video about the criminally insane. Okay, so that was just a little video kind of about the insanity plea, just kind of in a general standpoint. So let's kind of talk about a couple of questions here to finish up. So how should the courts approach cases where defendants refuse defenses that may benefit them? So, once again, like I'm sorry, not Timothy McVeigh, the Unabomber, Kaczynski, he refused an insanity defense for his own because he wanted to control the narrative. But was that actually the best defense for him? Would he have been considered not guilty by reason of insanity, or would he have been incompetent because of his refusal, even though he was a Unabomber, which was a extremely horrific event? So, with this being said, how should the courts approach this when a defendant is refusing this, when it could potentially defend them? Is that a sign of, more some type of another variation of a mental illness? It's a good question to think about. So I've got my reference list here, and that will finish up the video. And thank you so much for listening.